talk about something that I would call deep freezes that I've been coming across when doing body work with people, and also remote sessions with people, Zoom healing sessions. So there's a couple parts to this story. One part is that in my own personal practice, a few months ago, I started having very weird experiences with the breath. And huge thanks to the practice that I was doing with the teacher I was doing at the time, Corey Hess. He really encouraged us to not layer anything on top of the breath and not do any specific breath techniques in this physical practice that we were doing. And by not controlling the breath at all or encouraging it in any kind of direction, some number of months into my practice, my breath started doing really strange things, which for me looked often like not breathing very much for long periods of time. Obviously I would still take in enough breath to keep functioning, but it was like what my body and breath needed to do for very long periods of time to unwind was to just hold the breath and stay like that and sort of be led by that. Let the breath lead and do really weird things. And that can be really counterintuitive, especially because there's so many techniques around really deep breathing. Sort of the opposite. And what I noticed in that process was sort of coming out the other side of it. Not that my breath isn't still unwinding, I think it is, but there was a really prominent chunk of that in my practice for a few weeks there. And then coming out the other side of it, something came online for me as a body worker, an energy worker, facilitator. And what that is that my breath now feels more synced up with my environment, the person that I'm working with, that sort of thing. So for a long time now, I've gotten a lot of cues in my body, sort of somatic cues about the person that I'm working with, which is kind of my guide as a body worker, really. That's a lot of what I'm doing. I'm also responding to things that they're telling me and really taking in their experience of what's happening, but I'm very often being led by what I experience in my body as clues for what's happening for them and where to work and that sort of thing. And so with my breath syncing up more like that, now what I'm sensing into is what I would call these deep freezes pretty often with people, even remotely over Zoom when I'm not touching them. And it reminded me of something that I came across in Bree Greenberg's work last year. She's an addiction, eating disorder specialist in extractive and abusive systems and liberation. And she has a model that this also fits into very nicely. And I think she's the only other person that I've really heard talking about this specific type of freeze that feels different from the sort of fight, flight, freeze model that is talked about a lot more in the healing space. This is like a longer term, more permanent freeze deeper in the energy body is how I would describe it, which I know could come across as vague. It's hard to pin down. I don't feel like I understand it that well. It's sort of murky territory, but I'm having enough of these experiences consistently now that I'm sort of learning how to work with them and other people. It was more obvious how to work with them and myself than how to communicate it with people that I'm sensing it for. But the more that I work with it, the more that I think like, oh, this is really important. This is really, really important in healing work. And there's sort of an aspect of like huge bang for your buck in it, I think, because sometimes they're not actually that hard to work through. It's like very deep in the energy body, in the being, and can be very intense to work through. Doesn't have to be, often hasn't been in my experience. And then it opens up something that's been closed off for a really long time and can be a really sort of huge opening experience, can have a lot of reward and transformation available in it. So the way that I would describe working with them with other people, because I've struggled a little bit in finding the language, finding the bridge to communicate to somebody like, hey, I'm sensing this deep freeze thing and let's work with it, because it's not really talked about or well known, or it's, like I said, it's kind of murky territory. So what I'm finding is helpful in communicating it to people, first is giving a little like overview of that model, of kind of how I see us having these different layers of our energy body. And I know that it's just a model, it's a little oversimplified, but if we sort of think of having these more outer layers that a lot of people operate from a lot of the time, and it's more visible to people around us, and then these very deep, more primal layers that are sometimes pretty inaccessible and harder to be in touch with, but maybe more of ourselves, maybe more of who we really are, or more instinctual selves, more unconscious or subconscious. And so I sort of see these freezes happening at every layer in that energy body, and I'm trying to point at ones that I think are happening at some of these very deep primal layers. So I'll kind of give an overview to the person of that idea, that model, and then direct them. So usually how I'll feel it is, as I start to sense it, my breath will catch. And that's sort of a cue to me that there's one of these freezes operating in that person's body. And it can be anywhere. One time I was working on my friend's foot, and I sort of noticed the spot in his foot where I was like, what's going on here? I don't know, just hard to explain kind of intuition of there's something energetically interesting here, and I don't know what it is, but let's hang out here. And he's a super energy aware person, and also was like, oh yeah, what is that? And we both kind of were just sitting with it, not knowing what it was. And then I sort of had that sense of like, oh, it's a freeze. And as soon as I explained that to him, he could sort of like go into that and unfreeze it. And it but yeah, so that was in his foot. I think it's usually when I've noticed them with other people and in myself, it's been more in the heart space or the stomach, or the hips, some of those, more prominent, the back of the neck, more prominent sort of along the central channel parts of the body. So when I would sense that and sort of feel that sensation of my breath catching, again, the word freeze, I hesitate to use it with people sometimes because that can mean different things to different people. It can be kind of an overloaded word. It can have obviously a sense of coldness to it, which I don't think this necessarily does, or sometimes does. So I could explain it to the person as a freeze or like a fearful stillness, and sort of encourage them to look for that in the part of the body where I'm sensing it and start from there. Can you sense into that? Can you touch into that? Do you know what I'm talking about? Can you find that? Let's start there. Then the next thing that I would do is, at that point, it's sort of up to their body and up to them to move through it, and I'm there as support. And so, again, I would encourage them to let the breath do whatever it wants, which can be a counterintuitive thing because, I'm used to, when receiving massage or something, intentionally breathing deeply into the part of the body that we're working. So try to discourage that, encourage them to not layer anything on the breath and let it do whatever it wants, whether that's really deep breathing, really shallow breathing, not breathing very much, really fast, short breaths, whatever it wants to do, sort of let that lead, go into the fear, and at that point sort of see what the freeze needs, what it's there for, and what it'll take to come out the other side of it, and be the support for them in that. Yeah. Thanks for watching. Let me know if that was helpful, and hello from me and this beautiful oak tree.